Hi everyone, welcome to this week's DevOps Chat. Again, joining us this time, we have got someone who will be at Cloud and DevOps World later this month, Neil Connett. So Neil, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, hello everybody.
And I know that you're speaking, you're on a panel discussion talking about waterfall, agile, DevOps, and then
what's next?
What's next? What comes after that? So I think, and if I remember rightly, that's on the second day, so on the 15th of June.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like it'll be an interesting discussion, thinking to what the next stage is, and definitely encourage people to go along to that if they're in the area. So when we sort of talked about what you'd like to discuss, you came up with this title of Ops Forgotten, and specifically looking at how do we engage ops people more in DevOps. But before we get started with that, really interested to hear a bit about your background, what you've worked in the past, and also what you're doing now and what your interests are.
Yeah, great. So hi everybody again. So Neil Connett. I originally came from a development background, predominantly kind of Microsoft.NET sort of a background. I moved into implementation engineering, so that's actually going to customer sites often and deploying, so getting face to face with the customer. But after a few years of kind of doing that, I think I wanted to maybe have a look at something a bit different. So I found a role doing, of all things, problem management. So looking more at IT service management, problem management at the heart of ITIL. So very interesting, kind of learn this new way of looking at things. I think when I first started doing that, I had very little knowledge, if any knowledge, of kind of even what ITIL was. So it was an interesting thing for me. I found very quickly that actually it was very useful, very valuable. So I throw myself into that. And what I'm doing now, though, I am the cloud or platform operations manager, with also a view, another hat I wear, which is Devops Transformation lead. So it's an organisation, pretty large organisation, but we've probably got about 400 or 500 people looking at these sorts of areas. So it's very interesting. Lots of challenges.
Wow, yeah. So really going from a technical start to your career in development, and then moving over more to service management and the I2l side of things, and now looking after platforms and also a transformation towards DevOps, so covering quite a broad spectrum. So, I mean, I guess we've often seen. I mean, I've seen it at Worldline. Other people we've talked to on DevOps Chat have identified this, that often a move towards more of a DevOps way of working can start with the developers or start with people on the development side of the business. And I'm guessing that one of the things you're sort of observing is that can be a problem if ops aren't involved. So maybe just before we go too much into what the issues are, is that something you've seen, and why do you think it ends up that way? What's the reason behind it?
So I think you're absolutely right with that observation. Yeah, I think certainly most conversations I've had with people looking at DevOps, it does tend to be a dev first endeavor, if I can put it that way. There tends to be more of a focus on how do we develop these things? How can DevOps help us develop this and develop that? And sometimes we can forget that actually what DevOps is all about is about delivering with more pace, more agility, and increased quality. And of course, where quality comes into it, that's, in my view, where ops is often forgotten. And that's where I came up with this title of Ops Forgotten. I think why it tends to be forgotten is possibly because of I think historically, I should say, ops is seen as this kind of the overhead on the business. You've got your development teams, they're going off and they're creating all these fantastic things, and they do. And then operations are there just to keep them in check, keep them in line. Maybe the perception that they slow things down.
Yeah.
So that's often why it's kind of, in my view and in my experience, it tends to be a development-driven operation, and I think the business maybe reinforces that view because of what they perceive as ops being this overhead.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's interesting you say the business reinforcing it, because quite often it feels to me like the way those two sides are incentivized almost is bound to create that, which is generally ops being incentivized for stability, fewer outages, higher uptime, whereas developers generally being incentivized for getting more stuff out of the door more quickly. Now, I always think that an interesting thing about DevOps is actually those two shouldn't be, you should be able to have the stability and have the pace and the throughput. Right. But I think you're right that you can get this perception that ops is slow and don't like things changing in production. So why on earth would you involve them early on in a DevOps?
Absolutely right. And I think we've got to step back sometimes and just say, well, actually, what do operations actually bring to the table? What's their role? First of all, what's their value? Because, like I say, there is this perception that all operations do is they're an overhead. They deduct from your top line essentially. They don't bring anything of real value to the table. They're just to keep the developers in check and all that sort of thing.
And as you say, if that's maybe the gut reaction or an initial reaction that people have, let's turn that around a little bit. What do you think? What do you think is the value of getting ops involved early on with a transformation?
So I think the main thing I feel that ops bring to it is this control. And I've got the analogy of it's the brakes on a car, and really you don't have brakes on a car essentially to mean you can go slower. Although you're grateful they're there when you need them to be. It means you can actually go faster because it gives you the confidence. It gives the organisation the confidence that you can actually operate with more pace, with more agility, and still have the quality, which are the tenets of really what Lean and DevOps is really all about. So they offer this expertise. This expertise around service management. They tend to have more of a focus on the actual customer value because they're there face to face with the customer, be it proactive communications or I'm telling you that something's gone wrong or receiving the news that something's gone wrong, but they do tend to have that more customer facing experience. And I think something that's also often overlooked is what I call the operational resilience. So the 3 a.m. calls that something's gone wrong for an operations focused person, no sweat. I can deal with that. 3 a.m. Get up and we'll just get it done. So I think there's that operational resilience. Something I heard one of your DevOps chats from a few weeks ago with Larry Maccheroni.
Yes, yeah.
DevOps. And one of the things he talked about there, and I thought, that's bang on the money. That is, it's if you bring the ops focused people into it. What you're saying is you're building quality, you're building an operational focus in. As opposed to bolting it on. And Larry talks about security. You build it in as opposed to bolting it on. I think it's the same concept. If you can involve your ops focused people as part of the delivery of value. Earlier on, you're bringing your quality to the left. It's not a reaction; it's a proactive decision. It's a focus on service design. As opposed to using ITIL words operation. So,
and it's interesting. So I'm going back quite a lot of years now. On a team I used to manage, we I couldn't call it DevOps really, but what we did at one stage was get the ops guys to just look over the specifications, the technical designs for any new functionality. And what's really interesting is that they did bring that mindset of when it goes wrong, which logs am I going to look at? How am I going to work out what's gone wrong? How am I going to revert it?
Exactly
Which I'm not saying no developers think about that, but certainly they had that mindset of how when it's live and a customer says, why did it do this? How are we going to be able to answer those sorts of questions? Whereas the developer mindset, if I was to caricature it, would be more like, well, it'll all work perfectly and everyone will be delighted with exactly how it works and no one will ask any questions about why it did that.
The amount of, we're in meetings where we're hearing that is, Well, what if it goes wrong? But it'll never go wrong.
No.
It'll never happen,
But certainly my code obviously never has gone wrong. But,
no, well, mine neither.
But others apparently can. So it's, I guess, instantly, and I guess it's one of those things that you get. Everyone can sort of, like you could say to developers, oh, you need to think about how would you diagnose faults in production, but nothing really can replace many years of hard-won experience of trying to diagnose faults in production. I guess that's what you're getting when you bring people from the ops side.
I think as well, it's often the case that, asking somebody with an operations focus, what could we do to improve this? They've possibly never been asked that before. So if you're involving them in the development and the design of this software, this value, these features, etc., then it's often very motivational as well. That you're often finding that that's a great way to overcome some of these kind of silo mentality, this culture clash. So we've observed that as well. That can be a really understated but incredibly valuable thing.
As you say, getting that early involvement, it's almost, it sounds so obvious, doesn't it? But it completely makes sense that if you've known about a feature or a change for a few months and you've been involved with the design, then you're going to be a lot more relaxed about putting it into production than if someone phones you up at 5 o'clock on a Friday and says, oh yeah, we're just putting this live.
And this is so often the and I'm sure most people, a lot of people watching this video will be able to relate to that as well. It's, we've got to support it now. I didn't know about it.
Well, and to be honest, sometimes the good cases are where you get that phone call. The bad cases are where you find out when someone complains about it over the weekend. So that's right. I think we've got to then maybe come on to, and I can't believe that we've never mentioned this before in any of the other DevOps Chat interviews. We've got to come up, sort of talk about ITIL, I think. So perhaps you can start with your views on ITIL, how that sits with DevOps, and whether it supports it, whether it's against it. I do think there's many people believe that essentially ITIL is out of date. Maybe that it no longer has a part to play in the software delivery. So my view on that is really that's not the case. I do strongly believe that's not the case. I do think though that it does need to adapt. The what and the why haven't changed. What is it there for? Why is it there? What does it do? That hasn't changed. It's the how. I would say the how it's delivered, how the what and the why delivered possibly needs to change. So I think ITIL as a foundation for DevOps must be maintained. We talk about service design in ITIL. That's incredibly important. I mentioned the brakes on a car earlier. The control elements come from ITIL. It mustn't be seen as a barrier to delivering value. We talk about Eli Goldratt theory of constraints. He talks about assessing how do we achieve the continual flow of lean principles. How do we get that value to the customer with pace and agility? Control needs to be there, but we've got to move away from this again, the perception that ITIL is just there to some of the principles from ITIL are there to slow things down, roles and functions and silos that possibly it's been, it might encourage. So that needs to be overcome, I think one of the things that's really important is really a look at the processes. The processes, if you look at actually what are the objectives of those processes, most of them are still as relevant, if not more relevant. And I'll give an example. IT finance management, capacity management, demand management, they're more closely linked today with the cloud paradigm than they ever have been before. One of the things you hear, anybody that will talk about cloud will talk about this fantastic ability to infinitely scale. We've got unlimited capacity. That's fantastic, and most of the time, it can be as big as any one of the data centers that are out there, if it's not bigger. But that doesn't mean free. That doesn't mean free capacity. Yeah.
That really doesn't, you see, so that's where that control comes into it, because you start to see that, okay, or so we have expanded this resource group, whatever. So, but it comes at a cost, and now you've got the ability to see that. So, IT finance management is one of those areas where I think it's probably never been as important. I don't hear many people, kind of a previous kind of on-premise type paradigm that have really placed that much focus on it. Because that whole move between the CapEx, OpEx models and all that sort of stuff, Whereas today, if you spin up more capacity, you spin up more whatever, it is going to cost you more money. So there needs to be an understanding of that to realise the business case of that. Not to move too much onto cloud, but I think that's why ITIL is really massively important. And we mustn't forget that it offers a lot of the what and the why, but like I say, the how maybe needs a look at. How can we adjust that? How can we change that?
And it's very, I think that capacity management example is brilliant, because what you see is that one of the things that used to be difficult, typically it took time and effort to get new servers installed in data centers and online. So that's what you had to plan for and anticipate. Actually, if you're on a cloud platform, that is not really what you need to worry about at all. That's bottom of but as you say, there are new aspects like the costs, maybe even vendor lock-in, maybe whether the application, okay, you can spin up 1,000 instances, but if it's all going to one database server, is that so it, as you say, the role and the need to do it is still there, but what you need to focus on has actually shifted incredibly, really, hasn't it?
And again, it's shifted, as I say, it's shifted to the left. It's shifted, the quality and the need for these things has shifted more to the left, which of course has massive returns later down the road, down the pipeline. Understanding a certain amount of design is obviously needed to make sure that you do have the ability to scale as required. But it's easier than it's ever been before, which of course frees up people to be adding more value.
And so I'll say one other positive thing about ITIL, and then I'll maybe say something a bit more controversial. So again, when I've looked at it in the past, I think ITIL has a strong focus on continual service improvement, and I think most people would agree that with DevOps, if you're not constantly improving the way you do things, then you can't really call it DevOps. I've always felt a little bit that, and my recollection of ITIL terminology is not that good, but I think it has this idea of a pre-approved change. And I think, again, if I looked at that in the context of DevOps, I would say, well, part of it is about saying, are there certain changes, or are there changes which, if we do it, in other words, if you've had the peer review and you've had the ops review and you've got the automated rollback, can that be considered a pre-approved change? So in other words, getting more and more at the pre-approved level. Although if I remember rightly, that's a strong driver in ITIL, is the idea is you analyze what changes you have, and you find ways to not need a cab for them.
Absolutely.
So a lot of that, I think, sits really well with DevOps. I do have the feeling that sometimes ITIL, it's not really a criticism of ITIL. I suppose it's a criticism of people. And that is a little bit like health and safety, where people will say, oh, we can't do this because of health and safety. And actually, it's not that. It's just you have to do a risk assessment. I sometimes think people will say, oh, well, we can't do this, this number of releases, or we can't do this type of development approach because of ITIL. And it's not really because of ITIL, but if you don't want to do it, ITIL can be used as an excuse. And if enough people do that, then ITIL kind of gets associated with being very rigid. So I guess, again, is that, would you have a view on that? Is it something you've experienced?
Absolutely. I think, certainly coming from a problem management background where you're at the coalface of, service operation, there is an element of association. People deem the fault to be with ITIL or problem management or change management, because it's seen as the closest thing. It's proximity to to people's problems, the perception of those problems. So you do have we have had to battle that a little bit. But like I say, when you take one or two steps backwards and you actually look at what's going on, and the real role and the value that I2l brings to the table, it's significant and it's very valuable. And I think, again, like you say, it's very easy to kind of pin it to I2l as, oh, that I2l, it's that I2l again. I just, what we still doing following on I2l? Yeah, like I say, often it's not. It's something else. I wouldn't say it was people. Maybe the processes around it. The process, not the people. But yeah.
Well, and I suppose that's the other thing. I mean, ITIL itself is actually quite. You kind of have to implement ITIL and tailor it. So in other words, it's not. You can't say that ITIL in one organisation will be exactly the same in another organisation. So again,
it's a framework. It's. I mean, to go back to the tenets of ITIL, it's non-prescriptive. It's neutral. Best practice. And that's what ITIL is. And if you remember that, then and apply it as deemed appropriate to your organisation, it's valuable.
And I think, I do remember going to a BCS service management conference a few years ago, and actually what was interesting to me there was that the majority of the people attending were very excited about DevOps, and they also saw some really. So I remember one guy giving a talk, and he said, well, the shift he saw was that the sort of traditional way we've done things in the past is you install a server and you give it an IP address and you get the right OS put on it. And then once it's all done, you go and update a configuration management system to say where the server is and what the IP address is, etc. And he was saying, well, really with DevOps, you're starting to see the reverse, which is in code, you define what you need. That is the configuration item. And that is then used to create, sometimes automatically, the server. So it's no longer the case that configuration items are documenting something that has been installed. It's rather you're creating the configuration item, and from that getting the server out. So I think it's. I think we've probably established it is really useful to get ops people involved. It's really useful to, rather than saying let's throw away ITIL, actually look at it and figure out which bits of it are going to help you and support you, and how you need, as you say, the what and the why are the same, but how you're going to implement it might change. So let's finish off then with perhaps some tips from yourself about the best way of engaging people from ops and from the ITIL side of the business with a DevOps transformation.
I think what I'd say is most business change has to start from the top. There has to be a feeling that we need this from the bottom of the organisation. But it has to start from the top. There has to be sponsorship, real, genuine business sponsorship to make any of these types of things happen. So putting a business case together that shows the value of having ops in the DevOps team, at the core of the DevOps team, I should say, is a good place to start. Start with that, because when the numbers add up, the business can't argue with that. I think one of the problems you see is actually the culture clash. I think is something I mentioned. It's the culture clash. It's okay to say, well, bringing ops to the core of the DevOps team is incredibly valuable, but if that value is kind of undermined by the fact that you've got that culture clash and then maybe not operating well together, so you've got to encourage the teams to show this whole massive levels of empathy with each other. Opening up the communication bandwidth was something I read, and I think it was Effective DevOps. It was a book I read. Is massively important. One, get the business to understand the reasons why this is so important. Two, it's show that dev and ops working together does actually follow through on that value. And then I think three, it's that whole something I don't think I've mentioned is, but I'm a massive advocate of this whole lean startup concept. Start to adjust that culture that allows for failure, to fail fast, but to learn faster, and to experiment. So set it up in a way that, so you've got the business case, you've got the teams working together, and then you've got the culture that allows for things that might be perceived as wrong to happen, but to kind of ensure that the business is still behind it and still willing to kind of give it the freedom to kind of learn and adapt and realise that value. So I think they're the three main kind of things I would look at.
And if I could just ask you to go a little bit deeper on one of those. So where you talk about bringing ops people to the heart of the development teams.
Yes.
Are you sort of advocating that, you know, literally you don't have a separate dev and an ops organization, but you have mixed teams which have people who perhaps once upon a time were in a dev part of the organization and once upon a time were in ops, and bring them together? Is that what you're suggesting? Or
absolutely. I think bringing the two so organizationally, this is where the business sponsorship really comes in, allowing for that to happen. Bringing people with an ops bias and a devs bias together into a single team, not saying, well, ops are going to join dev or dev are going to join ops. It's together. It's this experiment. We're going to allow this to happen. We're going to try and allow that to happen and see what happens from that. But you are going to face challenges. There is a culture clash there. Not it's not a generalization, but you do tend to see that where, you know, you've got the more kind of dev mentality and the ops mentality.
Yeah.
Again, it's maybe
but also, I mean, it's classic kind of team building stuff, isn't it? That if you just on an organization chart say, oh, now this is the team structure, but actually everyone sits in the same place and everyone does the same job, and the ops guys still have never met the devs, then you haven't really created DevOps teams, have you?
So true. And something we one of the things that we were very successful, proved very successful when we set up the cloud operations, platform operations team, was to actually geographically bring the operations, the team, right next to the development area of the business. You know, there are these kind of different sections of the business, bringing them together, allowing them to sit next to each other. If you have a question, come and ask. Let's have a chat. Let's go to the pub and have a pint. Things like this, which are crucial. You know, it's kind of Tuckman stages of development. You've got your forming, your storming, your norming, forming. Allowing that to happen, but creating the environment where that can happen. But I will say that, I mean, that's very well in a small kind of close knit team, and often it is the perception that, you know, this whole lean startup thing, DevOps thing, only really works for small teams. What about if you try and make that work on a much larger scale across geographically distributed teams? You know, how does that work? And for me, that's where tooling comes into it. You know, collaborative tooling, kind of getting people just talking to each other all the time. Time zones is a bit of a challenge, but there are ways to do this. There are ways to overcome these barriers to effective communication. Essentially, is what they are, and I think it's all underpinned by again, massive empathy. You know, allowing people to kind of walk around in each other's shoes for a little bit. Maybe not literally, but you know what I'm saying. So I think that's one of the things that, you know, really, if we can, as a business, if we can foster that environment, that allows that to happen, and it will happen naturally. If you create the environment and you foster that environment, it will happen naturally.
And it's interesting you say that again. It takes me back to what Jose Casal said. He's talking about team motivation, I think, and exactly that. I mean, he saw the role of management was about creating the environment where these things would happen. And as you say, there's the danger always, I think, is that you shuffle boxes around on a PowerPoint, but as you say, you forget about where do these people go to the pub together? Do they have lunch together? Do they ask each other questions? Do they go and grab a coffee together?
It's so important, and I think, and this is really where the leadership comes to the front. You know, it's the human side, the people side, the leadership. You know, bringing these kind of teams together to allow that to happen. And I think whatever we can do. I think often where DevOps is kind of seen to fail, certainly from speaking, asking around, asking people, it's where there's been that failure to bring a cohesive unit together between dev and ops. You know, it's often where, even though maybe you've got organisationally on a chart, they sit as part of the same, they still have their clique, if I can use that word, where they still have that separation, even if it's just purely it's a silo in the way they think, and the culture is still existent. It's definitely the biggest challenge to overcome.
So I mean, That's fantastic. I'm conscious of time now. I mean, it feels like we've covered a lot of ground, right? From, why it's beneficial to get ops more involved, how to sort of handle ITIL, and then also, as you've given us there, sort of 3 tips, if you like, for getting those teams mixed and bonded and interacting in a way that's really constructive and useful and helps the transformation. So, really looking forward to the Twitter chat as well on Thursday night, and you'll be there for that. And of course, looking forward to your session at Cloud and DevOps World on the 15th. So thanks again, Neil. A real pleasure, and speak soon.
Yes, speak soon. Thanks. Bye.